Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories of everyday people and their families. I endeavour to continue publishing episodes ad-free. In order to do so, I would love your support by reviewing my podcast or consider becoming a subscriber for only the cost of a coffee a month. This gives you early access to episodes and also access to bonus episodes, of which at this stage there's over 30. Episode 192, The Clements Siblings. Frederick Clements was a pharmacist who created Clements Tonic that was popular in Australia in the late 1800s. He did not marry, and when he died in 1920, his spinster sister Edith challenged his will. Their parents were James Moore Clements, who was a master tailor, and he married Matilda Williams in April 1857 in Birmingham, Warwickshire, England. They only had 2 children, Frederick, who was born in 1859, and Edith in 1862. Frederick Moore Clements was born on the 14th of March 1859 at Witton, Erdington, Warwickshire, England. He was educated at Birmingham, where he was later apprenticed to a chemist. In 1880, at the age of 21, Clements visited South Africa, and in the next year, while working in a pharmacy at Port Elizabeth, he discovered the formula for Clements Tonic. There he met another English pharmacist, T.B. Melhuish, later a prominent manufacturer in Sydney of galenicals and simple tonics. Clements followed T.B. Melhuish to Sydney in 1881 and worked in his pharmacy. Clements was actually featured only 12 months after his arrival on a Felton Grimwade price list of pharmaceuticals in 1882. In October 1884, Clements passed the Board of Pharmacy's qualifying examination and was elected to the Pharmaceutical Society of New South Wales. 2 years later, he opened his own shop in Newtown and he began to manufacture his own tonic. In its original form, it was similar to Melhuish's common compound syrup that he was marketing, but Clements Tonic, a veritable twin brother of health and strength, enjoyed far greater commercial success because he advertised it widely as a splendid cure for many ailments, in particular for nervous breakdown. Mr. Clements used an advertising jingle. Clements Tonic for nerve and brain helps to make you well again. In 1894, despite the Depression, he sold his pharmacy and opened a factory next door to his Stanmore residence, Brahe, for the production of his tonic and Fletcher's pills, as well as Clements' Certain Cure. He also purchased property in Newtown in October 1894. In 1905, he sold most of his interests to Elliott Brothers Limited, believing incorrectly that he retained certain rights. In his retirement, Clements travelled and indulged in many scientific interests. He had a good knowledge of medicinal plants, and his garden, with a catalogue of some 800 names, contained many rare plants and well-stocked aviaries. He also had an electrical laboratory and proclaimed himself as a medical electrician, registered dentist, pharmacist and therapeutist. He also said he was an X-ray and fins and light operator. A former business associate, on seeing his book, Some Faces and Phases of Clem, that was published in Sydney in 1921, commented, "People who did not know him would suspect him of being a gentleman." Apart from local pharmaceutical bodies, he also belonged to the Linnean Society of New South Wales, although never attended their meetings. He was a Freeman of the City of London in 1910, a Fellow of the Zoological Society in 1910, the Linnean Society in 1917, and the Royal Geographical Society in 1919, all memberships in London. During World War I, he generously gave to patriotic funds in Australia and overseas. And he died a bachelor at Brahe on the 17th of August 1920 of Bright's disease and diabetes. He's buried in the Waverley Cemetery. And on the 7th of September in 1920 in the Mackay Daily Mercury, it announced his death. Mr. Frederick Moore Clements, who more than a quarter of a century ago founded a well-known nerve tonic that has won empire-wide reputation, died at his home at Stanmore in Sydney last week. The late Mr. Clements carried on business as a chemist at Stanmore for many years. He was in his 62nd year and was unmarried. Though he took an active part in many public matters, he never aspired to prominence in this respect. His Australian estate was valued for probate at £87,980. This and his English estate formed the F.M. Clements Trust for benefit of charities in England, including the Blue Coat School of London, which produced several of Sydney's early pharmacists. His library was bestowed to the local Linnean Society. His will was disputed in the Supreme Court by his sister Edith. He had disinherited her in 1920 and then arranged to leave her £150 a year until her death or until she makes complaint of or finds fault with or abuses me. He was more generous with his English relations and friends. In the Sydney Sun on the 12th of September 1921, it announces the court case in regards to this will. Clements's will, £110,000 involved, sister's evidence. The hearing of the disputed suit involving £110,000 relative to the will and codicil of the late Frederick Moore Clements of Stanmore, chemist, and proprietor of Clements Tonic, was resumed today. The plaintiff was Edith Clements and claimed to be the natural and lawful sister of Mr. Clements and the sole next of kin. The defendants are the Perpetual Trustee Company Limited, the executors named in the will, and to whom probate of the will and codicil of Mr. Clements, dated on the 1st of June 1920, was granted. Miss Clements is seeking a revocation of probate and a pronouncement from the court against the validity of the will and codicil. The lawyer called for certain letters written by Mr. Clements to his aunt. In one, the expressions occurred, "Oh, you silly woman, whiskey is a safe antiseptic." And another letter stated, "She says she'll throw herself off South Head. I don't think she will. She's not game." Miss Clements said that when the reference to South Head was made, her brother had been annoying her. He looked strange and peculiar. She told her brother that she knew more than he thought, and that she also told him that he had been taking too much whiskey. He said that the police had put him through the 3rd degree. That had some reference to the police calling at the house. And she was asked, "Did your brother drink a good deal of whiskey?" And she said, "Yes." "You can't alter my wishes," Mr. Clements wrote to Miss Clements in 1918. "What were you doing till nearly 8 p.m. yesterday? I've a right to know. Headaches are purely due to your temper." The lawyer then read another letter written by Mr. Clements in which he stated, "You've got a voice like a cross-cut saw and a disposition like a sitting hen. She's a spitfire and she went on strike yesterday. She cooked me some horrid pork chops and I chained down the kitchen window." A further letter ran as follows. "As Joe says, the only way to make money is by following the GGs. She's got the sulks again. I've told her that the Venetian blinds must be down at dusk. I do not think she's quite composed mentally. Her room smells of mildew. This sulky scullion has not yet knitted a pair of socks for our 800,000 soldiers." Then the lawyer read from a diary by Mr. Clements dated 11th of August 1910. "She is," it stated, "sulking again. God bless her. She called me that man. That shows her temper. She won't have a bath, and there is a splendid bath outside. She's left-handed and puts everything back-handed. She feeds at the kitchen dresser, cuts a loaf of bread against her chest like a Goulburn Street fraud. Slammed the door in my face. She squeals like a little dog out in the rain. I've given her £1,000 in pocket money and she hasn't thanked me. My father had 30 children and not one of the girls found a husband. I've kept her for 27 years in luxury. She took a photo of God's chapel out of the album. She feeds like a pig, mucks the food about and doesn't know how to eat. She hates me and threatens police. The place is covered with her left-handed fingerprints." Miss Clements informed Mr. Moore that she'd never taken a photo of the chapel out of the album. Miss Clements said that she'd heard that her brother had 300 sovereigns in a strongbox in the house, and she also heard that he stated that 30 sovereigns had been stolen. The lawyer read from another letter that stated, "I have remonstrated with my reputed sister." That, commented the lawyer, is the first letter in which Mr. Clements referred to her as my reputed sister. And Mr. Clements wrote another letter to a friend that stated, "Advice free, medicine 2 shillings 6 has always been my motto. I'll have you brought before me and sentenced to death. I'll fix the funeral for the cockcrow." Then there was another reference, stating, "To my lovely so-called sister. She spoils everything and sooner would do anything than give me my dinner. When only 5 years of age, she'd sneak up behind me and kick me." Mr. Moore asked, "Did your brother ever strike you?" She said, "Yes, on 2 occasions. Once he struck me on the head with his hands. I saw stars, but I didn't fall." Mr. Moore asked, "Did you retaliate?" She said, "No, I walked away." He then asked, "Did you ever take a knife to your brother?" She said, "No, and all I ever said to him was, 'Now don't touch me.'" Mr. Clements wrote to a lady friend in England, "She lays the table a different way every time. She says she had an offer. She wastes meat and vegetables. She puts the vegetables up in such a way that she thinks they are bunches of flowers. I'm not a saint, but I can go up or down with a clean manifest. She's obstinate, vain and pig-headed. If she had the attitude of a lady, she would now be worth £25,000. She's now tramping about the kitchen like an elephant. I've never married. I saw enough of it before I was 12. Miss Clements said that her brother posted in the kitchen a card stating that if breakfast is not ready by 8:50, dinner by 12 noon and tea by 6 p.m, the kitchen will be locked and not open till half an hour before the time of the next meal. Any more peevish, babyish tantrums means your definite expulsion from the house. Other cards in the kitchen bore menus for meals, instructions for her behaviour and instructions as to what he preferred on certain days. A list of things forbidden and a list of things sanctioned were also posted in his room where she could not see it. Describing the behaviour of her brother during the last 2 years of his life, Miss Clements said that he frequently came to the kitchen and abused her. He would call her a brazen hussy, a sow, a pig and a blithering idiot, and a thief. This sort of thing occurred every day, and when he would not stop, she would leave. Her letters were frequently opened by Mr. Clements. Mr. Moore gave a comparison of a will executed by Mr. Clements on the 14th of January 1918 and the will which was the occasion of the suit. In the former, out of the 100 parts into which the estate was directed to be divided, 35 were left to Miss Clements, and she was also to receive a legacy of £50 and permitted to reside in the testator's dwelling for 5 years after his death. In the present will, Miss Clements got nothing, though the codicil provided her an annuity of £150. The further hearing of the case was adjourned till tomorrow. So on the 14th of September 1921 in the Newcastle Sun of New South Wales, an article titled "Silence is Golden, Sisters Ordeal, Clements Tonic Money." In Sydney, the hearing of the disputed suit relative to the will and codicil of the late Frederick Moore Clements continued today. Today is the 6th day of the hearing, and the end of the 5th day Miss Clements has been in the witness box for 21 hours. Although slight of stature and frail of physique, Miss Clements has faced that protracted ordeal of the witness box with amazing fortitude. Further examined by Mr. Shan, Miss Clements said that when she had learnt, owing to her brother's demeanour latterly, to see that silence was golden. He asked, "Was not your brother a most voluminous correspondent? He corresponded with people all over the world, didn't he?" And she said he corresponded with people within the British Empire, but not all over the world. "Wasn't there a great change in your brother at the time of the outbreak of the war?" She said, "I didn't notice it." "Didn't he refrain from going to the races and all other sport because of the thought that there should be a suspicion of sport during the war?" She said, "I was not aware of that." "Who is assisting you to fight this action?" She said, "Not anyone." "Is any person assisting you outside or any person financing you?" She said, "No, no person at all." "I specifically deny," added Miss Clements, "that anyone is assisting me to fight this action." Mr. Shan said, "How much money had you at the time of your brother's death?" And she said, £180. "You can see my bank book." And that was the close of the case for that day. On the 22nd of September 1921 in the Mullumbimby Star of New South Wales, an article titled "A Will Case, Remarkable Evidence." In the Probate Court of Sydney, the hearing continued, and the plaintiff, Edith Clements, a sister of the deceased, claimed that when the testator executed his last will and codicil, he was not of sound mind. The plaintiff asked that the grant of probate should be revoked and the document declared null and void. The net value of the estate was sworn in at £110,000. Miss Clements, in continuation of her evidence, said that her brother had always been peculiar in manner. One day he came into her room and pulled her things out of the wardrobe and threw them on the floor. The witness told him that she would call in the police and that he was killing himself with whiskey. On one occasion he chained down the kitchen window to restrict it opening 10 inches. He complained that she'd gone on strike and that he had to do all the housework. He described her in a letter as an uproarious spitfire, accused her of sulking, guzzling and surging inwardly. On one card he complained that he had to put things right on the dining table 480 times and that he had to arrange the sideboard properly 481 times. Miss Clements said that during the last 2 years of his life, her brother was in the habit of appearing at the door of the kitchen or dining room and shouting directions and insults at her. He often swore and occasionally showed indecent expressions. On the 29th of September 1921 in the Sydney Sun, Clements' will case, Victorian witness, Inspector General of Insane. Dr. William Ernest Jones, Inspector General of the Insane of Victoria, was questioned. Mr. Shand asked him, "Taking into consideration all the facts, as far as you know them, do you think they indicate that Mr. Clements was insane?" And he said, "In my opinion, they do not indicate he was insane." "In view of the facts, as far as you know them, would you say that in 1920 Mr. Clements had testamentary capacity?" He said, "I would say he had in 1920 the necessary testamentary capacity in making his will." Further in view of the facts so far as you know them, would you say that Mr. Clements suffered from insanity or insane delusions towards his sister? And he stated, in my opinion, Mr. Clements did not have insane delusions towards his sister. Would you describe the vulgar abuse of Mr. Clements of his sister to insanity? He said, no, I would not. Dr. Jones said that the fact of many passages in Mr. Clements' diary being vulgar and couched in offensive language against Miss Clements did not, in his opinion, indicate insane delusions, although they might be conceivably construed as eccentricities. Mr. Clements, no doubt, was in some respects eccentric and vain. Dr. Williamson said that he did not consider that the fact of Mr. Clements having stated that he associated with ministers of the Crown and had been made a Justice of the Peace indicated a delusion of grandeur. He did not consider that Mr. Clements exhibited paranoia, and he did not consider there was a narrowing of Mr. Clements's mental vision. At that point, the hearing was adjourned. Nearly 6 weeks later, on the 18th of November 1921, in the Queensland Bundaberg Mail, Clements's estate. The value of the estate, English and Australian, of the late Frederick Moore Clements of Stanmore was estimated for probate purposes at £110,000. After payment of probate duties, federal and state, the amount of the estate was reduced to £92,000, allowing £4,000 for the costs of the hearing of the suit, which lasted 21 days, and the amount of the estate further reduced to about £88,000. Miss Edith Clements successfully attacked the will of the 1st of June 1920 in a codicil where she was left an annuity of £150 only, but under the will of the 24th of January 1918 was left 25% of Mr. Clements's net income. Under that will, the latter one being revoked by Mr. Justice Harvey, the probate judge, she will receive £1,300 per annum, or around £25 per week. And 2 weeks later, on the 2nd of December 1921, in the Sydney Evening News, Clements's will, his sister's share. The total value of assets of Frederick Clements included estate from Queensland, Victoria and England. The exact total was £112,243, 14 shillings and 7 pence. He directed his English trustee to convert all of his property into money and directed the Australian trustee to convert his Australian estate into money and remit it to the public trustee in England to be invested in investments set out in the will, and the entire fund to be kept together and known as F.M. Clements Trust. He directed his English trustee on ascertaining each year or half year the amount of income from the residuary estate for that period to deduct therefrom the sum, if any, by which the amount exceeded a multiple of £100. For instance, if the yearly or half-yearly income to any period amounts to the sum of £2,060, then the sum be deducted by the trustee to be £50, and to divide the income during 21 years after his death, and after the expiration of that period, the whole of the income to be divided into 100 equal parts, and 25 of these parts to be the income for his sister, Edith Clements, during her life, without power of anticipation. After his death, the trustees are directed to pay 10 parts to Dr. Bernardo's Homes, 10 parts to the Blue Coat School, Christ Hospital, and 5 parts to the Grey Coat School and Christ Hospital. The residue of the estate is to be devised to the trustees to pay the income to various relatives and friends for life, with the remainder to be for 70 charities in perpetuity. So a little bit about the Clements Tonic. Well, it was advertised widely, and his tonic was a success as a superb restorative of all power and tissue consumed by mental work or physical exertion. His big moment came with the influenza pandemic of the early 1890s. Clements shrewdly took out scaremongering advertisements in regional newspapers, which were in editorial style, so they might be mistaken for new reports. A typical example was headlined "The Influenza Epidemic." The influenza is raging again this year with unprecedented deadliness. The paralysing influences of this terrible malady have assumed the alarming dimensions of a plague. The distemper is of a powerfully destructive character and shatters its victims with fearful suddenness. The severity of the visitation eclipses all previous attacks. The medical faculty fails to account for the outbreak and is powerless to control its spread. Doctors, nurses and hospitals are doing everything possible for sufferers but are overwhelmed by the multitude crying bitterly for relief. A dispatch from one town states that 300 people died in one day. This was about the daily average, and streets were crowded with vehicles carrying the dead to their last resting place, and the sad vacancy of death depressed every household. Such trying times as these demand immediate attention. The doctors fail, and the many advertised cough and cold cures are only sedatives which interfere with the proper secretions of the respiratory tract. Recourse must be had to a genuine stimulating restorative, which, whilst curing its grip, will also strengthen and support the patient, and no article the world has seen so far can compare to Clements Tonic for these effects. During the great outbreak of influenza in Sydney in 1890, over 50,000 bottles of Clements Tonic were consumed, and its praises were sung in every quarter, as the disease was completely stamped out by the use of this remedy in 4 weeks. Such facts as this prove beyond the doubt of the most unbelieving sceptic the value of Clements Tonic for such diseases. One such ad reads, "Prevents and cures influenza. Clements Certain Cough Cure prevents influenza if taken when the symptoms are first felt, or it will quickly cure it, whether the case be of short or long duration in old or young. Pleasant to take, perfectly safe. Even the youngest, oldest or frailest one of your family can take it, with absolute assurance, and moderately priced, it is a remedy that should be found in every home everywhere. Clements Certain Cough Cure, guaranteed cure for coughs, colds, croup, whooping cough, bronchitis, influenza, hoarseness, sore throat, coryza, acute catarrh, and all inflammatory conditions of the throat, nose and chest. It costs $1 a bottle and is to be obtained everywhere throughout Australia from chemists or stores. Get a bottle today and be rid of that cough or cold of yours, and also be rid of the fear of it developing into a more serious complaint. Get a bottle at once, $1 everywhere." And this was advertised in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 27th of July, 1907. And in the Medicine of Colonial Australia, 1788 to 1900 book, it says, before the end of the 19th century, medicines were concocted with a mixture of empiricism and prayer. Trial and error, inherited law, or mystical theories were the basis of the world's pharmaceuticals. Clements' product, however, was most likely safer than many, as advertising stated that it was free from alcohol, morphia, opium, and all narcotic poisons, and quite safe to the most delicate constitution, whether the patient was a child or an adult. Doctors saw pharmacists or pharmaceutical chemists as unfair competition, but the cost differences were significant. A bottle of patent medicine might cost $1.06, but a doctor's visit $10.06. When Frederick Clements sold his interest to Elliott Brothers Limited, they marketed Clements Certain Cough Cure in 1906 and 1907, but all newspaper advertising ceased by that company in 1908. And his company still exists today. It's branded as Clements Hypol. In 1899, a product called Hypol was sold and advertised. And then in 1906, Hypol was registered as a trademark, and it's one of the oldest trademarks that remains in operation today. So that was after, officially, that he'd sold his interests to the Elliott Brothers. And then in 1980, Clements Tonic had a red label and was renamed Clements Iron, in line with the new Therapeutic Goods Administration regulations, and the green label remained the same with the Clements Tonic formula that is still enjoyed today. In the year 2000, Hypol had a cherry-flavoured option with a new improved formula. In 1987, a street in Canberra was named after Frederick Clements, called Clements Street, and there's also a suburb in southwestern Sydney named after him called Clempton Park. It's 13 kilometres southwest of the Sydney CBD in the district of Canterbury and Bankstown, and the council records state that it is named after Frederick Moore Clements, who became wealthy from selling the family health restorer, Clements Tonic, because he owned 42 acres between William Street and Bexley Road until his death in 1920. And originally, Clementon Park was the suggestion for the suburb's name, but records show that it adopted Clempton Park from 1925. And there was an article referring to William Clements, and this is in wartime. Dame Fortune smiled on that day many years ago when an elderly outpatient of Prince Alfred Hospital handed a time-yellowed scrap of paper to a chemist behind the dispensary counter and said, "You've been kind to me, young man, and I'd like you to take this prescription and use it as you think fit." When I was a soldier in India, he continued, the troops swore by it as a sovereign remedy in cases of lassitude and nervous disorders induced by the climate. A few weeks later, the old soldier died, and the dispenser resigned from his job and set up in a modest way as a manufacturing chemist. His special ware was a new and shining nerve tonic. Shrewd marketing and a clever brand of publicity quickly established the tonic as a bestseller. Almost overnight, a creased and faded scrap of paper was transformed into a lamp of Aladdin. The chemist had a sister, a strong-minded spinster, who from childhood had imposed her imperious will on the only surviving male member of the family. She had kept house for him in the early days of obscurity, and now, as the money started rolling in, she burst into full bloom as a lavish hostess in the plush and chandelier tradition of the gay 90s. Sounds of revelry filled the new house at Stanmore, and late Victorian bonnets nodded bleak condemnation of such goings-on among the nouveau-rich. Matchmaking mothers set their daughters' caps at the eligible bachelor who lauded the revels. So the years rolled on, and gradually the scale of entertainment dwindled until finally the big house stood shuttered and sombre and people only with the ghosts of former gaiety. The chemist, an old man now, was regarded as an eccentric. He died, and an elderly spinster dwelt alone, an embittered recluse in a silent mansion rustling with memories. Only the other day it was reported in the daily press that Miss Edith Clements, 83, a recluse, was found dead in the cobwebbed and dust-laden hallway of her Stanmore home. So Edith died in June 1943. She'd been born in 1862 in Warwickshire, England, and initially she was an assistant to her father. He ran a sewing machine shop in the 1881 census in England, and her mother was not listed on that census. Edith and her father had a boarder and a servant. However, in the 1891 census, their mother Matilda is listed by living by her own means, and Edith is living with her and is a music teacher who at this stage is 29, but the father is not listed. They also had Matilda's niece living with them, who was 20. So in the Sydney Daily Telegraph on the 23rd of June 1943, it announces Edith's death. Heiress found dying in ruined house. Miss Edith Clements, beneficiary of the 110,000 Clements Tonic fortune, was found yesterday in her semi-ruined home. She died 10 minutes after admission to the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. A post-mortem examination showed she died from kidney trouble. There were several superficial wounds on Miss Clements's body, which are believed to have been caused recently by falls of ceiling plaster in her 9-roomed house. Miss Clements had an income of £1,500 per year and had lived the life of a recluse at the home for more than 40 years. Since the death of her brother, Frederick Moore Clements, 23 years ago, she allowed the house to fall into ruin. Police found Miss Clements lying unconscious on the floor after Lewis McPherson, a night watchman, had informed them that milk had not been taken from the front garden for 2 days. Police found the entire house in disrepair and disorder. Rubbish had been swept into corners. A heap of tea leaves was found lying on the kitchen table. Costly furnishings were covered with dust, and valuable china, pictures and ornaments were scattered about the floors. Mr. R.A. Goodyear, a neighbour, said, "I knew Fred Clements very well. Before he sold Clements Tonic for a huge sum to a firm of city chemists, he used to ask me to pay him neighbourly calls. Towards the end of his life, he became rather peculiar. He told me he'd been into the habit of having a different serviette ring for every day in the week, but that his sister had not changed his ring at times, and he had been obliged to fine her 3p for her oversight. He also told me that he had caught his sister feeding a cat he did not like. He had a tribe of cats running about the place. He spent most of his time in a laboratory he built at the back of the house. Before he died, he put strong bolts across the back gates in case anyone gained admission to his laboratory and learnt his trade secrets. Before Fred Clements died, he told his friends he left all his money to a red-headed sailor in England, but could not remember his name. A year or so before he died, he fell into the hands of some racing urgers who told him they could double his fortune for him. He did not attend the races, but handed over large sums before he became too ill to read the names of the starters. One day he asked me over for a drink, and when I arrived he said, "I have champagne, but you're not getting any." He poured out a whiskey and soda. In all my visits to the house, I never saw Miss Clements. Less than 2 years ago, a thieves broke into the house, gagged Miss Clements and stole a lot of her clothing, and this probably helped to undermine her health. Frederick Clements left his sister £150 a year until her death, or until she makes complaint, finds fault with or abuses me for this provision for her or for anything else. Miss Clements had the will upset on the ground that at the time he made the will her brother was subject to delusions. The court ordered the trustees to revert to an earlier will in which Clements had left his sister about £30 a week. The whole estate was valued at £110,000. It is stated that charities in England will now receive the whole estate. And on the 24th of June 1943 in the Sydney Sun, Miss Edith Clements was buried beside her brother, Frederick Moore Clements, originator of Clements Tonic, in the family grave at the Waverley Cemetery yesterday. Only half a dozen friends attended the service at the graveside. And on the 1st of July 1943, in the Innisfail Evening Advocate, Clements' case, amazing diary. In Sydney, the death of Miss Edith Clements, 82, amid ruins of former luxury, recalled a strange will case that lasted 25 days, cost £5,000 and set Sydney agog 22 years ago. It recalled that with the judge making the decision, he said, "I find that the deceased was suffering from such a disorder of the mind as to poison his affection and his sense of right. His disease fostered an insane hatred of his sister." In later years, an irritable man, Clements began an amazing diary of his sister late in 1918 and instituted a system of fines for her for what he referred to as misdemeanours. They included, for every article found out of place, 1 pence, for fat wasted, 1 pence, for staying outdoors after 7 p.m, 2 pence, stamping about the floor, 2 pence, second offence same day, 4 pence. Interspersed with these items in his diary were entries such as, "Every boomerang you throw at me comes back and hits your nose and makes it more puggy. Her mind is crass and stupid. She puts 2 large butter dishes on the table for only 2 people. Do you think you can bounce the man that carried Clements Tonic to victory?" In his summing up, Mr. Justice Harvey said that Clements was a self-made man and, like many self-made men, was suspicious, vain and self-assertive and bombastic. And on the 2nd of July 1943 in the Western Star and Roma Advertiser in Queensland, there's an article titled "Search for Lost Will." All efforts to discover the will left by the late Miss Edith Clements, 82, of Stanmore Recluse, who was a fashionable Sydney hostess in the 90s, have proved so far unsuccessful. When legal officers of the public trustee entered the home to search for the will, they were confronted with a mass of furniture and bric-a-brac, mostly in disrepair, indicating the splendour in which Miss Clements had lived before she became a recluse more than 20 years ago. They've ransacked every nook and corner of the large 7-roomed home and examined every piece of furniture, searching for secret drawers in old cabinets or other hiding places. Miss Clements was found dying in her home with a superficial head wound, which was thought to have been caused by falling plaster from the ceiling. The detectives at first suggested that she'd been a victim of foul play, as there were bruises and cuts over her left eye and on her left arm and leg. But the post-mortem examination disclosed that the cause of her death was nephritis, a disease of the kidneys, and the broken plaster falling from a crumbling ceiling in her home was the cause of the bruises and cuts. Her brother provided her an annuity of £150 a year under the will made in 1920, but the will was upset, allowing Miss Clements to have £1,300 a year. So an interesting story of a man that was able to create a product that he promoted very, very well and earned a lot of money out of, but unfortunately for him and his sister, that resulted in a lot of discord. And I feel that there was a story that really deserved to be told, as neither of them married and had their own children. So there are no direct descendants of either Frederick or Edith Clements. In fact, none from their immediate family.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.